So Andrew Brandt used to be like an executive for the Green Bay Packers, was in charge of the salary cap, kind of all that stuff.
Andrew Brandt, former vice president and general counsel of the Green Bay Packers.
And now he's like a professor of practice. I think it's Villanueva.
We will have a new structure of college sports where schools opting in will be able to pay up to $20.5 million of direct payments to athletes for their NIL rights. That's a lot of money. It's a far cry from where we were. And I'll leave you with saying that will create a situation where NIL finally means what I've always thought it's going to mean, which is now it's legal. Now it's legal. Paying student athletes will become legal. So that's where we are legally.
So the question is Andrew Brandt correct? The guy who was, basically like a president of the Green Bay Packers, a professional NFL team. Is he correct now that college sports, especially football, is essentially professionalized?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and we're going to have some growing pains for sure. And all of the different, things that the NFL has worked out over the decades are going to have to be worked out from scratch in college football. But yeah, if the question is, are we going to essentially end up in a situation where universities have a salary cap and disperse the money amongst their football players and everybody's cool with that? Yes, absolutely.
We just had the House settlement case, which is where a lot of this stems from. I mean, do you want to kind of explain what the House settlement is? We had the clip at the beginning where he's talking about how every team has $20.5 million. Where does the $20.5 million come from? Does every university actually have to opt into this? What are some of the nuances of this before we really get going on this podcast?
My understanding is that is still to be determined. I think that, of the schools that compete for the college football playoffs every year, the booster associations are so rich that they're not going to have any problem coming up with the $25 million. But I think it's also possible that we're going to see that coming from conferences in the form of television rights, shares, and dispersals.
So what's the future of college sports then? Ultimately, how many changes is this going to create? Because at this point now with NIL, you essentially have, at this point, it used to be like student athlete, right? It was the student first, athlete second. And then I would say, once you had the big money coming into like March Madness, particularly in the 1980s, it was more athlete student. Now I was actually out talking to one of my buddies who was a D1 track athlete, and we were talking about this yesterday, but we basically came up with, it's like now it's influencer, athlete, student, right? Like that's kind of like, if you want to actually capture the NIL dollars, you have to be an influencer first and foremost, athlete second, student third. So I mean, where are we at with the whole like student athlete student whatever model?
Yeah, you mentioned the House v. NCAA case, but I think we actually have to go back to NCAA v. Alston, which is the case from a few years ago in which the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that the NCAA's business model was essentially illegal. It was an antitrust violation. And if you read the fine print of that unanimous majority opinion, what you see is, well, if the NCAA really wants to find out like where the line is, it's welcome to come back before, some of these secondary courts and we'll kind of work it out. And that's fine. But then you read Brett Kavanaugh's concurrence and it's like the NCAA's business model would be flatly illegal in any other circumstance. And it's plain reading that there just isn't a lot of appetite for the NCAA to come crying about, we can't enforce our rights. And I think what's happened here is that, most fans are fine with college athletes being paid. But what we didn't expect and frankly don't like, even those of us who are capitalists, we don't like unfettered capitalism in college football. And we should be clear, college football is what this is about. Like nobody cares if the men's volleyball team or whatever is losing players on the transfer portal. The problem is that the rules against paying student athletes were eliminated on an antitrust basis, right? The verdict is that colleges are collaborating to restrict player compensation. And so having received that verdict, colleges now know that basically anything they do to restrict player movement or eligibility or pay will be seen as further collaboration. So I wish we could go back in time and find some way to say, yeah, you got to let players be paid, but let's not go the antitrust route, because that's just had so many terrible consequences. And as I said a moment ago, now basically college football has to start where the NFL was in like 1930, where just none of the rules of like how the business of team development is going to happen have been constructed yet. And I'm sure we'll talk about the various organizations and entities that are trying to construct them, but it is the Wild West out there for sure.
So you think we're basically at ground zero then for collegiate sports at this point in 2025?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I would just encourage everybody who's listening. There's a terrific website. It's called collegesportslitigationtracker.com. And you go to this website and it gives you a fairly I think it updates it daily, fairly up to date kind of case by case listing of all of the different, judicial processes, the different claims and actions that are playing out right now that are determining every single element of college sports. I mean, you have eligibility lawsuits. You have movement lawsuits. I wrote about this recently. You have one school suing another over tortious interference. You have schools suing conferences to get out of their, commitment to play in that conference. It is just a wild scene. I think I read I cannot remember the name of the case, but I think I've read somewhere that a player who had exhausted his NCAA eligibility had gone to the NFL and had retired, probably in his late 20s from the NFL, was now exploring whether or not he can go back and play college football. Now, that's an extreme case, but, if we're going to go the antitrust direction, I can't really think of any legal reason why the NCAA should be able to say, hey, man, you're 30. You just had a 9-year NFL career. No, you can't come back and play against 18-year-olds other than it's crazy. But it's crazy is not a legal defense, right? So I suspect we're going to see that come before a judge at some point, if it's not already.
You think we'll just get to the point where there is a collective bargain agreement at the NCAA level, or really not even the NCAA level, because the NCAA is not even actually enforcing the NIL. You have a third party, or is it like Deloitte with the NIL Go that's actually mediating these NIL contracts? So it almost seems like at this point, the NCAA, are they just going to go away at a certain point, at least in terms of regulating football and basketball? It seems like you'll have some type of super league for football, men's basketball, and then the other sports might kind of follow the NCAA guidelines. And you kind of mentioned in one of your other articles about how like the University of Kentucky was the first university to spin off its athletics program into a for-profit LLC entity. And it seems like that might be the model going forward, is that you're just going to have these big, like the Power Four conference teams split off their men's college and their men's football into a for-profit LLC. And then maybe the other sports will remain and say the NCAA, and those men's football, men's basketball will be part of a for-profit league that's outside of the control of college athletics.
Yeah, that would be my guess. I don't know that it will be 4 conferences. I mean, we've been hearing for years rumblings about the SEC, the Southeastern Conference, and the Big Ten, which are, of course, the 2 most powerful football conferences, basically joining forces to create a super league and telling the NCAA to go pound sand. I think we have to keep making the distinction between football and I guess to an extent men's basketball and then the other sports. Like, now that, let's say a women's swimmer, can get a little NIL money or whatever, I just don't think that there's a huge appetite, to challenge the NCAA's governance authority because the stakes are so low. Hey, I got my $50,000 from the car wash down the street. So, great. But in the case of football, right? I mean, there's just so much money. Like, why should the NCAA get any of it? Why should they have any say now that they've totally been defanged as a regulatory authority? My guess is that we will finally see some new rules put in place by the conferences joining together to say, look, we just cannot let the madness continue. But what I don't think is going to be successful is unilateral attempts by the executive branch to say, look, I'm knocking all your heads together. Here's how it's going to be. So like we saw President Trump's NCAA executive order, which I'm sure we'll talk more about here in a minute. But I mean, I'll just go ahead and spoiler alert, I think that order is totally like unspecific and toothless, and anyway will be struck down by a judge. I mean, after all, it's a Trump executive order, so there's a judge somewhere who is eager to strike it down. I think what Trump is doing there, and this is my other hope for the future, I think what Trump is doing is that he is signaling with that executive order, signaling to Republicans in Congress, here's the kind of bill that I would like to sign. Here's what I would like whatever you all do to look like. The problem with that, Jesse, is that obviously like nothing in Congress can be done right now without the support of Southern Republicans, or as we should perhaps call them in this context, SEC Republicans. And like, does the senator from Alabama, does the senator from Tennessee, does the senator from Florida have any incentive to like level the playing field? No, we don't want a level playing field. We want the richest boosters. Or I should have thrown Texas in there. They're the most money of anybody. You know, Texas does not want a level playing field. Texas wants to win the national championship every year by throwing oil money at players. And I suspect that's what's going to happen for a while. Like Ohio State, Texas, Alabama are going to just trade the national championship belt for a while until we finally find a way to work this out. It's wild out there, though.
Yeah, it's interesting because like there's a lot of different opinions on this, but as a whole, the NCAA, all like the D1 sport teams, basically in the aggregate lose money. Right? There's only basically men's basketball and football that are the quote unquote revenue generating sports. A lot of people are talking about like women's basketball right now, which, I mean, how many universities does women's basketball actually bring money in? I don't even know if there's one. From the research that I was doing, the only women's sport team in college that actually was profitable was Nebraska volleyball, like one program. Essentially, you got football and basketball that are bringing money in. So if those are spun off, then what happens to, I guess, all the other programs that are losing money? And even then of the actual football teams and basketball teams and D1, over half of them lose money. So if it was just like, let's just let capitalism run, then you'd basically have something like 60 football teams, 60 men's basketball teams, and then you'd have one, maybe, a women's basketball team, a women's volleyball team, a women's gymnastics team, or something that maybe either breaks even or has a small profit. So is that like the future? We'll just have 60 football teams and 60 basketball teams, a couple, volleyball games, and that's it. I mean, that's like if we're talking just profit motive here, capitalism, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why, there was some pushback against Kentucky's decision to spin its athletic department into a for-profit LLC, and not only spin it into a for-profit LLC, but to take investor capital. Well, like, angel investors, I mean, they just want their money, right? Like, women's fencing is losing money, Kentucky, and we're a business. Like, what are we doing here? But then, of course, as your listeners know, there's this thing called Title IX, right? And so we go back to Title IX, and it's like, well, there has to be equal opportunity for female athletes. Now, I'm gonna do this from memory, and so our listeners can look up the details. But at the end of the Biden administration, President Biden released, I can't remember if it was an executive order or if it was a regulatory dear colleague letter from the Department of Education. I think it was the latter. But the thrust of it was, listen, colleges, all this revenue sharing that athletes are about to get, Title IX applies to that. So, the ladies wrestling team, the ladies fans, they have to get their fair share. Now, I think Trump almost immediately withdrew that guidance upon taking office. But it does show you that, of course, there's going to be there are going to be financial questions here, but there are also going to be political questions. And my guess is that, like much else in this country, it's going to ebb and flow depending on what party controls the White House. Now, the bigger question is, as you said, like what happens if the money sports basically take their ball and go home? So now the sports that are left are fighting not even over scraps. They're fighting over a negative balance sheet, right? Well, at that point, I suppose it has to come down to re-answering the question of whether college athletics really are part of the educational mission of the university. And if there's no audience and if there's no money, I wonder if some universities may end up saying, I mean, this is far in the future, but again, if the SEC and Big Ten just said, "Hey, look, we're doing our own thing for football, and we're beyond y'all's reach," I think that could conceivably have a cascading effect where mid-tier public and private universities are just like, "Look, we just can't afford to do this athletics thing again, or anymore." I should say.
Talking about the House settlement, where basically there's like a salary cap, so to speak, if universities decide to opt in of $20.5 million. But this is not actually new money coming in from any other outside entity. The university would either have to raise an additional $20.5 million if they want to spend up to that, or they would have to reconfigure the different departments to actually pull in this $20.5 million. So there's a lot of universities that just could not actually find another $20.5 million, which means that, if you got a middling football team, well, then maybe the cheapest option is just, hey, we're just not going to compete in football anymore, and that'll save a bunch of money. You don't have to worry about paying out $20.5 million to the football team. Maybe you'll focus on basketball or, I don't know, gymnastics or field hockey, whatever. But if you get rid of the football team, you're talking, a typical roster in college is like 100 guys, over 100 men. So now with Title IX, now all of a sudden you have to figure out a way to balance that ratio. So what are you doing? Two options are to cut women's sports, or B, to replace football with, say, sport teams you don't have. Maybe you don't have a men's soccer team, or maybe you don't have a lacrosse team. So then you could those are cheaper sports. Maybe you just kind of replace that. But how many universities are just going to be able to pull out this $20.5 million without actually reconfiguring in the budget?
I'm reminded of in the 1970s, a coach named Dick Vermeil was coaching UCLA, and UCLA was going to the Rose Bowl. Now, this story might be apocryphal, but I've heard it multiple times. UCLA was going to the Rose Bowl, and Dick Vermeil, the football coach, did not like how the team was practicing. Like, who cares about the Rose Bowl? And so he allegedly said to them, like, if you all don't give me what I want in practice, I'm going to go down to the fraternity house and find 50 guys who would like to play in the Rose Bowl. And I think that there is a lot of truth to that, which is we may find ourselves in a system where the schools that just can't come up with the 20 million or whatever are just like, hey, let's have a football team with the best football playing boys on campus who just happen to be here. And our opponent will be the school down the road who also can't afford to field a crypto professional team. And now that might be interesting. I mean, it raises other questions too. I mean, why do these big money schools even need their football players to attend class? The root of all this, Jesse, is that the NFL has a rule that says that you have to be 3 years removed from high school before you can go to the NFL. And that's a safety rule as much as anything else. And I think, one of the reasons why college basketball has for so many people fallen off the radar is that the NBA, first of all, had hey, you can go straight to the NBA, and then now you got to have a year, but hey, your year can be college, or you can go overseas, or now we're going to have this NBA developmental league. And so you just can't count on it. Whereas in college, what made college football so great is that if you signed a guy, you just knew you were getting him for 3 years. Because back in the day, if you wanted to transfer as a player, you had to sit out a year. Well, of course, that's no longer the case. And so the more we professionalize college football at the highest level, and again, I'm talking about the SEC and the Big Ten, the more it's just kind of a farce. Like, why is this multi-millionaire sitting in like freshman comp or whatever? And I would just encourage everybody to listen to my last appearance on this podcast where we talked about Chat GPT, because now these football players in class aren't even doing any actual work. They're just uploading it from the computer.
Is the football player even go to class that often though? I mean, like they travel so much. I was reading about UCLA. Since UCLA joined the Big Ten, I think in the football season in 2024, they had like 24,000 air miles. Because, it's no longer regional, it's national, that they left the Pac-12. So, like, if you're traveling all this distance, don't you just have a fill-in tutor that goes to class for you, that takes notes and sits in for your test and things like that? Just because, like, they don't even have the capacity to attend a lot of the classes during football season. Like, at that point, you're right, why even have them attend class when they're not even attending class a big chunk of the time anyways?
That's right. And we should be clear that is not just football. That is not just men's college basketball. Like the football and college basketball are the reason why conference realignment has happened. People want the TV money for their high dollar sports, but once they switch, it affects everybody. And so I wrote about this recently. I'm just pulling up the article right now because here we go. Okay. The 2024 Stanford women's volleyball team didn't host, they went to Milwaukee, Lincoln, South Bend, Louisville, Dallas, Pittsburgh, Miami, Atlanta, Chapel Hill, and Durham in a single season. Let's hope you ladies can study on the plane. Right? I mean, that travel schedule is just insane. And it's a consequence, but this is the kind of thing that makes me think like, there are some folks who would say this will all work itself out. No, it won't. It will not work itself out. And the reason I know that is because we're tolerating a situation in which the Stanford women's volleyball team is flying 1,000,000 miles. And probably not even in that nice of a plane. They might just be flying commercial for all we know, right? So, it's a wild situation.
So, what do you think are the biggest, like as a fan, I guess, because most people watching this obviously aren't professional athletes or collegiate athletes. The vast majority of people watching college sports are watching it as a fan, as opposed to being a player or a coach. So, from the majority perspective of the fans, how does this impact your experience, whether that be as a viewing experience, going to the game in person, or just as kind of a casual observer?
I'm 45 years old. I've lived in Tennessee all but 4 of those years. I'm a Tennessee Volunteers fan, and I'm going to cheer for whoever runs through that T. But if I can borrow a phrase from the Ringer and former ESPN guy Bill Simmons, he used to say, we're cheering for laundry out there, and that's about right, because as I said a second ago, you used to be able to count on. I'll just give an example here, right? So the University of Texas signed Arch Manning, who is, of course, the nephew of Peyton and Eli Manning and one of the biggest quarterback prospects in years. Now, I have no reason to believe that Arch Manning, who's about to start his second year, will be unhappy with Texas. I suspect he'll do well this year and do well next year, and then he'll go to the NFL, having made a lot of Texas fans happy. But that's not always how it's going to work out. I mentioned the Tennessee Volunteers. We lost our 5-star quarterback, Nico Iamaleava, earlier this summer, after he led the team to the college football playoffs, and he just decided that there's some questions around the story, but my takeaway is he or his people asked for a little more NIL money. Tennessee blanched. Nico set out of a practice, and Tennessee said, "Look, you're fired. That's it. We can't have that. We can't have people sitting. We can't have people holding out for more NIL money like they would in the NFL. We just cannot have that on the college football level." And while I can absolutely assure you that every coach and athletic director in the big conferences was doing a little fist bump. Thank you, Tennessee. Hold the line. We can't have this what's the word I'm looking for? Where you establish we can have this precedent set, right? We can't set the precedent that guys could just hold out. But Nico no longer is the quarterback for Tennessee. He's a quarterback for UCLA. And the quarterback that Tennessee got to replace him is not going to be as good. And so as a fan, I'm sitting here thinking, hey, we went to the college football playoff last year. Nico's a year better. Maybe this year we'll get to the second round. Maybe this year we'll seriously compete for the college football playoff. And then just like overnight, one random day in May or June, it's like, nope, you're a 7-win team. And that is the fan experience right now because coaches, and I'll just borrow their language, coaches have to recruit their whole team all over again every year. And so you can never relax. And so I totally get, there were some flaws in the old system. I'll say again, like in the olden days, if a guy wanted to transfer, he had to sit out a year. Well, that's not fair because what would happen is, as you probably remember, coaches would make promises to players. Then the coaches would leave for some other job. And now this guy who came, to Florida State to play for Bobby Bowden, this guy who came to wherever to play for whomever is like, why am I here? And I'm stuck here. I can't leave. So, okay, I get it. Let the guy transfer. But we can't have a situation where, every year, every player on your football team is a free agent. That's crazy. The NFL would never put up with that, right? And I'll throw another one out there. Now, this is absolutely the nightmare scenario. But what legal recourse would a school have if a player said, you know what, I know I played weeks 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 with Auburn, but I'm playing weeks 6 through 12 with Alabama. And I'm taking over all of my knowledge of the Auburn playbook. And when we meet in the Iron Bowl, I'm going to tell them all your stuff, right? I mean, why can't there be in-season trades or in-season free agent signings in NCAA football? Simply because there haven't been before, but as we've discussed, the old system has crumbled. So yeah, I'm sad as a fan. Can we talk a little bit about the Wisconsin Miami lawsuit, because this gets into that? Yeah, so the University of Wisconsin is suing the University of Miami right now for tortious interference. And what happened is, Wisconsin signed a player. Gosh, what was his name? It was Xavier something. Xavier Lucas, a wide receiver. No, pardon me, a cornerback for Wisconsin. Wisconsin signed him to an NIL deal. He was already on the team, so they re-upped him, basically. And then allegedly, some Miami boosters, maybe some assistant coaches came and sat down with him in his mother's living room and were like, let's talk about how you can make more money as a Miami Hurricane. And so off he went, and he's going to be a Miami Hurricane this upcoming season. And Wisconsin hops in and says, well, now hold on a second. If college football players are going to be professionals, then they have to honor their contracts just like anybody else. And that more than anything, more than Congress, certainly more than a presidential executive order, and certainly more than the NCAA, that is what I'm hanging my hopes on as a college football fan. Can we get a precedent? Can we get a ruling? Can we get some case law here that suggests that once you sign the deal, you are stuck with it for whatever the remainder of the deal is? And then what we'll have is a system that's very much like the NFL, where you can you can have let's say you're a quarterback, right? You could have your $50 million a year, but it's going to be a 5-year deal. And there's going to be risk on both sides. If by year 5, you're an $80 million guy, sorry, we're still paying you the 50. If by year 5, you totally stink, hey, we're still paying you the 50. But also, if you're unhappy with our offense in year 4 or 5, sorry, you're under contract. And that, I think, is what ultimately is going to save these high-dollar sports if we get a ruling in this Wisconsin-Miami case that suggests that universities can't just be poaching players from each other.
Like you mentioned before, we're basically in the wild west because this NIL opened up all sorts of deals. It wasn't just the NIL, it was the O'Bannon, and there's the Alston, like you just mentioned a bunch of them. But it seems like we're just headed towards a model where essentially these athletes will be employees, and then they'll probably just end up signing a 4-year contract. And, I don't know if they get hurt or they have some off-field behavior or something. Maybe they get released out of that. There's probably a clause in the contract. They get released, which is how they would actually transfer. It's just so early on. I just can't imagine in 2035 that the system we have now is going to be in place. But also because now you're adding in the profit motive. I do think that you will have the regular NCAA, but football and basketball will not be part of it.
It's interesting. The question of whether college athletes are employees is one that's going to have very different repercussions for the high dollar sports than it does for the no dollar sports. As I said, in the high dollar sports, if athletes are employees, well, that comes with certain privileges, compensation, but they're already getting that from the NIL deal and from now with the House of the NCAA, they're getting it from direct payments from universities. But it also comes with obligations. I'm an employee. I'm bound by, as you said, like behavioral codes. Or maybe there is a clause that says something about, performance incentives. But most importantly, if I'm an employee, I may be subject to essentially a college sports version of a non-compete clause, right? But of course, in the no dollar sports, if I'm an employee, that means that I can unionize. And that's what they want, right? So like the men's equestrian team, they're not going to get any money unless they unionize and collective bargain with the university. And then a university might well say, well, we don't need a men's equestrian team, and certainly not making any money. But of course, there's as whenever management is negotiating with labor, there's going to be political consequences. And the kind of people who go to colleges, the kind of people who teach at colleges, less and less the kind of people who govern colleges, but still, they're still on boards of governors, some residual leftists. They're all going to be in favor of labor and any dispute between labor and management. So part of me wants college players to be declared employees, and eventually the Supreme Court will decide, or to put it another way, John Roberts and Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett will decide. But part of me thinks that that it's just going to cause an endless series of headaches for schools that now have to collectively bargain with quote unquote employees who aren't actually adding any value to university operations.
I told you earlier in this podcast, I was talking to one of my buddies. He graduated from a non, power 4 school, is what is it called? Like a G5 school, whatever. It's still like a pretty big D1 university. He was on the track team, and we were kind of talking like, he graduated in 2020, so it was the year before NIL. So he still has friends and whatnot that are now in this new era, but he never experienced it directly. But we were kind of talking like, who are the winners, who are the losers? And he basically says the only winners really maybe going forward would be football, basketball players on the men's side. But even among those, you're only talking about the top, the star quarterback. Not every team has a star quarterback. You're talking about, the big defensive end, a pass rusher, top receiver, right? A handful, and not every D1 team even has them. Of course, the Ohio States, the Alabamas, etc. But he's like, it's really, you're talking like 2%, and then of course the basketball teams, the Cooper Flag, or whoever, and then he's like, everyone else essentially is going to lose out. The average athlete, if you're like, let's just say you're like a backup guard on the football team, or you're a backup defensive end, even at a okay school, you're essentially getting like $100,000 a year in value between your free athletic scholarship, free room and board, free books, a stipend. You have access to elite coaching. You have access to the alumni network, which who knows how that builds your network after you graduate from university. And none of this, of course, is taxed, right? This is all tax free. The average student that doesn't have a full athletic scholarship or any kind of academic, say, achievements, just your standard run of the mill student, graduates from university with about almost $40,000 in student debt, while also working probably multiple jobs, full-time job, a couple part-time jobs, whatever. And this, so, like if you're, you mentioned the example of like Archie Manning, like, yeah, Archie Manning is bringing a lot of value to that school, probably should be compensated, but he will with the NIL. But the backup right guard, he won't get any NIL, name, image, likeness deals, but he's getting this $100,000 a year package in terms of his academics and access to awesome nutrition coaches and some of the best strength and conditioning coaches on the planet, especially at, say, Alabama or whatnot. So it seems like the only people that really benefit from the NIL is at the very top of the pyramid. Everyone else is going to get absolutely screwed, is the way I like, at least is talking to this track athlete, the way that he saw it. I mean, what do you kind of think of that assessment?
There'll be some teams at the highest levels that give, that have a deal with their NIL collective where they give a little bit of money to everybody who makes the team. But yeah, I mean, it's a thing. I mean, I remember as a Tennessee Volunteers fan, some of my Vols friends can remember like all the specifics of this. I think it was November of 2022, and the Vols had a player named Jeremy Banks, and he was making trouble in practice, and their quarterback, Hendon Hooker, who I loved, went over and was trying to break up a scuffle, and Banks was like, "Get out of here, Mr. $10 million man." Like, not everybody's so it's that kind of thing where, there are going to be like team unity consequences. And also, I know that there's almost too much money at stake for what I'm about to say to matter, but there's a real sweetness factor that's being lost. I mean, I remember one of my favorite college football moments ever. This went viral on YouTube, so you may have seen this actually. This was when James Franklin, who's now the head football coach at Penn State, was at Vanderbilt. And he was just going over a film session at practice. And he was showing, what some walk-on had done, some practice play. And Franklin was like, that's the kind of effort that we need from Vanderbilt Commodores. And that's why that guy is now a scholarship football player for this team. And the room went wild. The guy came forward. Franklin gave him a little scholarship envelope. And seeing this walk-on get, a 1 year, $80,000 scholarship for Vanderbilt because of something that he did in practice to please the coach. I mean, that is just one of the best college football moments of my lifetime. And we're just never going to have that again, right? That's just gone. All that stuff, because the Suns are now so high that kind of, that kind of thing just isn't going to be a thing.
I guess the kind of the point maybe I rambled on too much was just the incentives are misaligned. Now, like, basically the NIL is really for the money-making sports. This is a minority of sports. So now that everything else is going to be skewed because of football, like all these other sports are going to have to suffer the repercussions because of football.
Yeah, and they already are with the travel. Maybe it would be better for all of the other sports if football and men's basketball just went their own ways. But that's assuming that a Democratic Department of Education or a Democratic Congress doesn't codify this idea that, the women's sports, which are by and large not profitable, are getting part of the football winnings, right? Now, if that happens, it raises the next question of, okay, let's say that the women's swimming team, by law or regulation, is now getting some of the money that the men's football program earns. Okay, which swimmer gets what? Is it even? Are schools allowed to essentially bid for the best swimmers? Here's a fantastic question. Let's say, I think this will probably be the case, that Ohio State and Texas will have the two best football teams for the next decade. Do Ohio State and Texas now have an advantage in all of the women's sports because they can take some of that football earning and just, bid for the best swimmers, bid for the best fencers, bid for the best gymnasts? It's a fascinating question. There's just no way to know how all this is going to work out. But I think what we can know for sure is that it's harder to field a unified team when everybody is making different salaries. Everybody's 18 through 22. Everybody knows what everybody else is making. Everybody's a social media influencer. And then we're all just, regular greedy humans to begin with, right? Because you already had hard feelings over playing time and hard feelings over coaching favoritism and all the other stuff that comes with college athletics. Now you're throwing money into the mix. So I just think that almost irrespective of what we do, there's going to be unintended consequences. If players are employees, there's going to be consequences. If players are not employees, there's going to be consequences. If football stays in the NCAA, that's going to have a trickle-down effect. If they leave, I don't think that necessarily means, although maybe it would, but I don't think it necessarily means that we're then going to have, an era of never seen before peace and justice in the no money sports. That'd be great, but I don't know that we can even anticipate all the consequences of some of the decisions that are being made today. And crucially, they're being made by judges, right? They're not even being made by the people who have been in charge of college athletics for 100 years. Whatever we do, there are going to be consequences that we can't anticipate right now. And that goes for if we treat players as employees or if we don't, or if football and men's basketball go their own separate ways or stay with the rest of the gang. And it's just not, we just don't have enough information to say like how all of that's going to, shake out. And especially when you throw in the wild card of politics and the fact that you've got, and I'll just speak in generalities here. Like you've got one political movement that is perhaps most concerned with fairness to athletes, especially those who are, quote unquote, of color. And then you have another political movement, and I'll throw myself in with this lot, that are just like totally trapped in college sports nostalgia. And we just want it to go back to the way it was in the 80s. Well, that's never going to happen.
Do you think that college sports was so broken that we needed to have these massive changes? And this is going to take years to shake out. Look at the NFL. I mean, the NFL didn't have free agency until 1993, actual free agency. Once you were signed by a team, they basically had your rights. I mean, I'm from Wisconsin. I remember the first big time free agent signing was Reggie White, who, is a free agent, I think in 93, signed a deal in 94. And the time was like a 4-year, $17 million deal. Kind of shows you how much the salary cap and whatnot has gone up. But do you think college sports was so broken that we need now to have these massive changes? Because now once, like the whole expression, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you're never putting it back in.
I don't think it was so broken that this was necessary, but I think that behavior by schools and conferences made this inevitable. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to have a situation, as we started having like 10 or 15 years ago, where schools are just constantly playing musical chairs, trying to hop to a better conference, trying to get a better TV deal, trying to maximize the value of their college sports programs. If you're going to let that happen, it just becomes politically untenable, and untenable from a public relations perspective to be like, well, no, but wait, no, you players can't have any of this money, right? So in retrospect, what I wish had happened is that the NCAA had cracked down harder on, the movement of coaches from one school to another and the movement of schools from one conference to another. And if they had said, look, we're just not doing all that stuff, I think they would have had more of a leg to stand on when it came time to insisting that the players are amateurs. But then I do wonder how much of this was inevitable. I mean, it's just a fact that the American people are willing to spend hundreds of billions of dollars enjoying college football. And that money is going to be made. And so the question of who gets it is always going to be pertinent. And so, once the engine is going that fast, I just don't see any way that you're going to be able to avoid answering some of these questions about player status and fairness and who gets what.
You're talking a big, I guess, chunk of it, like we mentioned, the 1980s with March Madness. And then, really it's just, there's so much money, billions of dollars in deals for March Madness as well as college football. And that's kind of like skewed the playing field where you get a lot of these players that felt like they weren't necessarily getting their fair share, which you could say in their case was probably true. But again, like we mentioned earlier, like probably only 2% of like these guys really are the ones that are driving forward the deals. I mean, even in the NBA or in pro football, you go to the Chiefs to watch Patrick Mahomes. When Michael Jordan was playing, you were watching the Bulls to see Michael Jordan. If Michael Jordan was hurt that game, you might not even have showed up. That's the whole point of going to the arena. It almost seems like they're trying to lump every athlete into the same category when not everyone can be Scarlett Johansson, or not everyone can be Livy Dunn, who's like not even a great gymnast, yet she made over $4 million in NIL. So then like she's more of an influencer than an athlete, but whatever the people are attracted to, whatever the criteria that is. But the fact is, like, they decided to change all of college sports for really just a very small percentage of athletes that were really not getting their fair share, so to speak, that were kind of, getting taken advantage of financially.
And it won't even work. To use the Patrick Mahomes example, it's just not possible that the Chiefs can pay Patrick Mahomes what he is actually worth to the franchise. They would have to just give him like 40% of the stake of the franchise. It's almost incalculable. The way that you would calculate it is you would say, what were the Chiefs worth? And, I forget now when he came in, 2017. What were the Chiefs worth then? And what are they worth now? Is it doubled? I bet it's doubled. So you're going to give Patrick Mahomes $3 billion? And let's take Arch Manning again as an example. Now, let's say that Texas wins the next 2 national championships with Arch Manning starting at quarterback. That is a real possibility. Now, think about all the knock-on effects of, Texas winning the college football championship 2 years in a row. All of the positive effects for recruiting, for campus facilities, for booster donations, even faculty recruitment. Like that would radically improve the University of Texas for these next, half decade or whatever. Is Arch Manning going to get an amount of money that even is close to what he has done for the school if he indeed plays as well as some people think he's going to? I don't think it's possible. The only way that you could ever even approach paying the top players what they are actually worth is just to give them unfettered movement. Listen, I'm Arch Manning. Listen, I'm Patrick Mahomes, and I know I started the season with the Chiefs, but I've got to get what's mine, and the Colts are going to pay me $1 billion to start for them in their must-win Week 17 game, right? So, we can't have that, but that is the only way that Patrick Mahomes is going to get what he's worth. So, there are just some, I guess, some practical, there's some practical impediments, and what I would call some sportsmanship impediments to the truly unfettered capitalist system that would see the top players getting paid what they're worth. So it's like the worst of both worlds. Back to your point, right? We've totally screwed college sports, trying to give the players their fair share, and many of them are still not going to get their fair share because there are just too many economic reasons why that's not going to happen.
Going back to talking to my buddy that went to a fairly major school but not part of the Power Four conferences that has a really big football tradition. And I asked him, I'm like, well, why don't you just get rid of the football team? That way you'd save money and you're not winning many games anyways. And he's like, well, a lot of students, he's like, they actually go to a university because they want that football. They want to tailgate. They want to go to the stands. And he's like, if you got rid of and he's like, if you're like heavily academic, you're already going to the Ivy Leagues or you're going to some elite academic institution anyways. The average state school, you just want to get a degree, kind of get the full college experience. Getting the full college experience generally means going to the basketball games, going to the football games, going to some of those sporting events. So if you eliminate, some of these football departments or you shrink down some of the athletics, like all of a sudden now is your enrollment decreasing because now people aren't going to that university because they want to get the full college experience, even though you're not actually at a Power 5 school and again, you're not there academically because you would be at Harvard or something that's not paying athletes anyways.
Yeah, that's right. Now I'll just give two examples. So here in Tennessee, in West Tennessee, there was a little private religiously affiliated college called Lambeth University. Lambeth. And Lambeth is now defunct. I think they closed about 15 years ago. And they're now they're a campus of the University of Memphis, even though they're, 80 miles away from Memphis. But the only reason that school lasted as long as it did is because they had a football team. And if you wanted to go to a Southern Christian liberal arts school that has a small student body, if that's the college experience you're looking for, there just aren't a lot of schools that have a football team. Now, the other example is, and of course, I've forgotten the name of the school, but it was an Alabama school, and Alabama and Auburn conspired to try to make them cut their football program because, once in a blue moon, Alabama and Auburn would lose a recruit to these guys. I think it was UAB. Yeah. Okay. It was the University of, okay. So Alabama and Auburn would occasionally lose a recruit to UAB, University of Alabama at Birmingham. And so they said, look, we're not going to let you have a team. We're going to get with the state and we're going to make you shut down your program. Well, of course, there's money at stake there, but UAB is not winning the national championship anytime soon. But what they wanted was to offer the football experience to their students, right? I mean, that's one of the things. If you don't get into the University of Alabama or you can't afford Auburn, which is outrageously expensive, you might say, look, I'm going to go to UAB. I'm not going to get that, absolutely top of the line football experience, but I'm going to get something. And that is absolutely a factor. And I think that we can just go down the list, right? I mean, I don't know that there are a lot of people who say, I don't care what my college is, but they have to have a volleyball team. I don't know what my college is, but they have to have a ladies softball team. But cumulatively, the culture of the college sports experience absolutely is a recruiting pitch. And I'll go further than that. We've been talking this whole podcast about NCAA Division I. So if you go down to NCAA Division II, and I taught at an NCAA Division II college, college sports are a major enrollment recruiting aid. And all these Division II colleges are tuition dependent. If the year's crop of freshmen does not show up, we're going out of business. And so, at a school like that, you add a sport and you say, hey, 18-year-old, come on, you can, I notice that you're a good high school gymnast. Come on, you can be a gymnast here. We'll give you a 1/3 scholarship, and our discount rate's already 50%. So if all we give you is a 1/3 scholarship, we're coming out ahead in the deal, and you can continue your gymnast career. Now, is that, Simone Biles is not going to take that deal, but Sarah Biles might, right? Somebody who just wants to keep playing, or like the 10th best guy on his major high school baseball team, who's not getting any interest from Major League Baseball, and he's not getting signed by Mississippi State or whatever. But he might want to go and still play baseball. If he wants to go to Trevecca Nazarene University, which is where I taught, we're happy to have him, and he can continue his career, and he can be a student. And I'll tell you what, Jesse, there's still that kind of elemental old school purity to the Division II experience. There's just not any fans because it's not on television, and nobody is watching, UT Chattanooga play women's basketball. I actually know nothing about women's basketball, so if UT Chattanooga made the women's Final Four yet last year, I apologize. But my point stands, right? We lose something when we professionalize players, and Division II is a place where you really still do get the old school student athlete experience.
But you think maybe that's what we'll just see more of? Maybe we'll just have, the top 40, we'll have a Power 40 conference or something. Maybe you combine the Big Ten and the SEC with, I don't know, maybe another conference of some of the other elite schools, got 40, 50 programs. Everything else kind of returns back to more of that amateurism, actual student athlete model. And maybe, if, maybe some of these teams, they won't have a football program. And if you don't want to go there because you want to go to a party school, well, the school is saving money by getting rid of the football program. And maybe a lot of those students that are attracted to the party model, maybe those are students that flunk out or drop out anyways. Maybe go F them. Let's just get back to what a university is for, which is the academic side of things. Let's teach these students. Let's cut the fat. Let's just go to D2. We're going to opt out of that $20.5 million. And if you don't want to come here because we don't have big time sport programs, well, then go to another university that does. And if you can't get accepted, well, then you'll be forced to come here anyways. And then they'll increase their ability to make, profit because they don't have these unprofitable big recruiting budgets and now you have these universities, they have to hire GM. I mean, that's the thing of all the extra costs these big universities have with NIL. Now they have to hire a GM. They got to protect themselves from lawsuits. How many extra lawyers are on staff now? And so there's a lot more overhead that's going to be associated with the actual big schools that want to kind of play that game. And so I think you might just end up seeing a lot of schools that are like, yeah, F this. Let's just focus on academics.
Absolutely. And once a school gets there, they're probably going to be better off having gotten there. But the process is going to be painful because the minute you start saying, we're cutting football, well, now here come the alumni, and they don't like that one bit. And they start threatening you with reduced giving. And I mean, one of the things that we obviously we don't have time to get into it. One of the things we've seen with, the wokeness adventurism on campus is that when donors get wind that things are not going, things on campus today are not like they were in 1975, they start making real threats, and we've seen, I'll just use the University of Virginia as an example. I mean, the University of Virginia's president is gone. And it's not exclusively because of conservative UVA alumni, but they played their part. Now, transpose that onto the athletic program, right? If Harvard's a bad example because they have more money than they know what to do with, but I'll go ahead anyway. If Harvard wants to cut their football team, are there going to be some Harvard alumni who are like, not so fast? I bet there would. So I do think that there'll be some PR challenges as universities attempt to get on the right side of all this stuff financially.
You're right, but if you have multiple universities kind of doing it simultaneously, I think it's a little bit easier to swallow that pill. If you're the being the first in anything is going to be a little bit more challenging. Kind of referencing what you were talking about earlier, are a lot of about the politics, and you wrote an article talking about Trump's executive order. Do you think this is going to be played out more in the courts, or is it going to be more like the University of Kentucky spinning off into a into a for-profit entity? They're kind of taking the bull by the horns, being the leader in that.
I think that Kentucky got away with what it did because it's ultimately an internal organizational matter. Where the courts are going to get involved is if Kentucky's, if the men and women who are providing the capital, who've made the capital investments in Kentucky's new athletic department, LSC, if they say, hey, we've got to cut some of these underperforming sports, like this is not making us any money. Well, at that point, they'll be getting, depending on who's president, they'll be getting a dreaded dear colleague letter from the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights complaining that they're violating Title IX. And at that point, courts will get involved. But yeah, I think that for the most part, the involvement of judges in college sports are like the biggest story in sports in America right now. And almost nobody's talking about it. We had, a couple of months ago, we had that Trump v. CASA lawsuit that was ostensibly about birthright citizenship, but that was really about universal injunctions. Could just some like random judge in Portland strike down a executive order or a law for the whole country. And if you go and read the majority opinion, which was written by Amy Coney Barrett, she kind of slaps Ketanji Brown Jackson a little bit for judicial supremacy. Well, judicial supremacy is the name of that's the name of the game in college football right now. And I'll just say again, anybody who wants to read more about what we're talking about here should really go to this College Sports Litigation Tracker website. It is just page after page of lawsuits, and these are all questions that when you and I were kids would have been settled by the NCAA in 5 minutes over a laugh. The NCAA, I just think of the evil middle-aged men smoking their cigar in the smoke-filled room, right? You can't do that. Get out of here, right? I wrote, I can't even remember what my article was about, but I wrote recently, it was about the Bill Belichick situation, in North Carolina. Did you read about this, where his girlfriend has created a PR nightmare for him? Well, so, one of the things I wrote when I was writing about this is that the NCAA of my childhood would have put out a hit on Bill Belichick before they let him bring his girlfriend to campus and start, messing around with actual athletic department decisions. Well, now the NCAA is totally defanged. And so of course the courts are stepping into the breach. Right. And so all these questions, we don't have time to go through the whole thing, but I'm just looking at these cases here, all these questions about, player movement and player eligibility. Player eligibility, one of the foundational questions of college sports forever, is going to be decided by a judge and then a panel of judges and then ultimately by the Supreme Court. And right now, of course, the rule is you have 5 years to play 4 seasons. Well, there's a lawsuit right now. Hey, I want 6 years. And so let's say they win. I'm sure they will. Okay, fine. You can have 6 years to play 5 seasons, right? Or you can have 6 years to play 4 seasons. So, but ultimately, there's just no legal reason. The NCAA doesn't have a leg to stand on to make any hard and fast regulation of player eligibility. Because if they do so, that's collusion. Right? All of the conferences and teams are colluding against players on the basis of their being what? Old? Too experienced? already graduates of college? I mean, half the players now on these big name teams are already graduate students, right? So I think what we'll ultimately see is that judges are going to decide what eligibility means, and if they follow their own precedent, and this is why the antitrust thing is so damaging. If they follow their own precedent, I suspect we're going to get to a dispensation in which there are no limits on eligibility. And, Patrick Mahomes may say at the age of 40, you know what sounds pretty good right now is one more season at Texas Tech. And the hilarious thing, Jesse, is that if Patrick Mahomes at age 40 went back and played football for Texas Tech again, so many people would watch that. It would be
it'd be a ratings bonanza for sure. Yeah. We always hear about like non-revenue generating sports and the revenue generating sports. And it seems like to me, like a lot of the presidents, chancellors at these major universities, they're not really sports people. They're more like academics that have kind of progressed through the ranks. But it's like no one's talking about like, what about the revenue generating research facilities and the non-revenue generating research facilities? What about the revenue generating majors and the non-revenue generating majors? I mean, based on the sports stuff, should we get rid of all like lesbian studies? I mean, how much money is that really generating? Or was it like Reagan, the breakdancer from Australia, she like has a PhD in breakdancing, like, okay, so I'm sure that's a revenue loss for the university. Should we then I guess it just seems weird that we have to focus, there's so much focus when it comes to the majority of majors. No one cares if they're quote unquote revenue generating or revenue loss. But when it comes to sports, then all of a sudden it's like this big kind of debate, but no one questions like, hey, maybe being part of a sports team and building this network and teamwork and the ability to meet people from different walks of life and come together on a team actually has a lot of value versus sitting in some sociology class or some art history class that I guess it just, to me, like, where are you getting more value from? And so if the value of education is actually to learn and be able to be a better person and be able to work with people from all walks of life, I don't know why we're putting a dollar amount on that when we don't do the same thing for other components of college life.
Well, I think more and more we do, though. And right or wrong. I mean, I'll just give a couple of examples. Like about a month ago, the public university system in Indiana cut 20% of its academic programs. And they did it not because those programs were too woke, although it wouldn't surprise me if some of them that was a factor, but no, they did it because these programs just didn't have enough students enrolled. And I think that, 10 years ago, your point would have been absolutely right. We put up with endless inefficiency where academics are concerned. And now you're telling me that women's swimming has to go because it can't turn a profit. Yeah, it would be totally hypocritical, especially if we decided that women's swimming adds value to the student experience. And that's ultimately what we're here for, right? But I think now what you're seeing is that especially public university systems are really trying to make up for the increasing lack of public interest in funding them in the manner to which they've become accustomed. I work for an organization that spends a lot of time writing about and thinking about the University of North Carolina system. UNC has 16 campuses. And how many, I'll throw a crazy example. Like, how many UNC system schools should offer a PhD in astrophysics? My guess is that 2 of them do right now. We could look that up, but my guess is 2 of them do. Well, if the answer were 10, the Board of Governors would be well within their rights to say, like, okay, NC State, you can have one, and Chapel Hill, you can have one, and the rest of you have got to cut your programs because this is ridiculous. We're duplicating our efforts here at taxpayer expense. So I think more and more you're going to see these academic questions being answered on, if not purely, then certainly more financial terms. But that really raises another question, which is, to what extent is any sport that isn't pulling its weight going to be safe, given the near total financialization and professionalization of the college sports experience? It's again, to come back to the earlier point, it's another question of unintended consequences. What is the point of college sports? If the point of college sports is to earn money for the athletes, then we do what one set of policies cascades from that. If the point is to make money for the university, we might make a different set of decisions. If the point is to provide the student athlete with an experience that is meaningful to him or her, then we might make another set of decisions. Now, I will just go ahead and confess to you that in my heart of hearts, the point of college sports is to give me something to watch on television on Saturdays in the fall. That is my priority. And I am for policies that preserve and heighten that experience, which is totally ridiculous and selfish, but there it is. And I'm not alone. Let me assure you, I have hundreds of thousands of friends who would say, yeah, all this talk about paying players is nice, but ultimately what we care about is the on the field product. So that's part of the reason why, like, my understanding is in Europe, they have essentially like sports training academies that if one's a very promising soccer player, basketball player, so you go to a sports academy, right? There's no real reason why 18 through 21 year olds who want to play football but are too young for the NFL should be grouped into a college team and go to a math class. It's just stupid, right? But if the University of Tennessee Volunteers became I don't even know what, like the East Tennessee Orange Birds or something, like not affiliated with the college, but were otherwise, still playing in Neyland Stadium, still, approximately the same group of guys, still the same color uniforms. I think that something would be lost because, as a nostalgist, I want it to be affiliated with the university. But I also recognize that that's silly and probably going to stand in the way of some progress that we need. So it's a mess. That's my parting thought. It's a mess.
Is there anything you want to discuss that we didn't talk about?
I'll just say the big thing to watch, we can't have it both ways. If we're going to treat the high dollar college athletes as professionals, then they have to honor their contracts. And schools can't be out poaching, the other institution's talent if that involves manipulating someone into breaking his contract. And so I think ultimately that is where we're going to find the beginnings of some solutions. So when we say once and for all, these guys are employees, these guys are professionals, and so they have certain obligations as well as certain privileges. Now, of course, as with anything else, there's going to be unintended consequences of that. I strongly suspect that we're going to look back in 20 years and say, we just ruined the whole thing to make, 1,000 18-year-olds into millionaires, and it wasn't worth it. But let's not continue with this ridiculous system where you have like total professionalization, but none of the consequences of that. So guys are just playing fast and loose with their contracts. It's just not a tenable system.
We all know that football and basketball essentially fund all the other non-revenue generating sports, yet there's a lot of animosity towards the football players because they get, quote unquote special treatment and they're flying on chartered jets while the other athletes are taking buses. But if you actually spun off the football and the basketball, the actual sports that were then generating revenue, like I think those other athletes will no longer be envious, but want them back because that they're essentially funding those sports. But it just seems like the unintended consequences are absolutely insane. Like the unintended consequences will forever change the landscape. And people don't really even talk about that because they're so focused on their favorite football team.
I mean, I agree with all that, but it's also, it's no different than, the emotion that maybe I feel when I enter an airplane and walk through first class on the way to my seat in the back row by the bathroom. And the answer to that is, I should work harder at my job, or I should go back in time and, not be a theater major in college. Ultimately, it actually is true that tens of millions of people want to watch some of these young men play football, and tens of people want to watch some of these young women play volleyball. And while I think that the capitalist impulse is out of control in college sports, I think we at least have to grant that much, that financial rewards are going to flow to those who are doing something that others want to pay to watch. And if, I don't know the future. If 10 years from now, like women's gymnastics is out earning football on television, I will be the first to say, give them their money. And those football players don't get any of it. And so when President Gavin Newsom, or God help us, President Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, hey, Title IX applies. You got to share. You got to share and share alike. I'm going to be against it big time.
Today's guest has been Graham Hillard, editor at the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal. So, Graham, just two final questions. First is just let us know where people can find you, that information with the James G. Martin Center for Academic Renewal, and then leave us with a final thought.
Thank you. You can find the Martin Center at www.jamesgmartin.center. And I encourage you to check out our website. We're running daily commentary on higher ed issues, certainly athletics, but also issues having to do with out of control costs, politicization, viewpoint diversity, innovation, all that good stuff. I'm also a contributing writer at the Washington Examiner magazine. Please subscribe or check us out online. And I may be off the college sports beat for a little while, but I am certainly looking at the outcome of this Wisconsin-Missouri lawsuit that we've talked about. And if that goes the way I think it's going to, which is that either Miami's going to settle or a judge is going to smack Miami down for stealing Wisconsin's under contract player, that'll be worth writing about, because I think that's some case law that could really make a difference to the future of player movement.
My dear friends, that is it for this episode of El Podcast. Once again, if you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube as well as Rumble. You can also find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts for watching and listening, and we will see you on the next episode.